If I had reacted that night, my daughter would probably still be in that marriage. That's the part people don't understand when they hear this story. They think a good mother is supposed to stand up, raise her voice, stop it right there at the table, make a scene, protect her child. I used to think that too, until I saw how calm he was when he did it. We were sitting at the dinner table, just the three of us and his mother. It was supposed to be a quiet evening, a small dinner to remember my late husband. Nothing dramatic, nothing unusual. Emily reached for a serving spoon and dropped it. Just a small mistake, the kind nobody should even notice. But he noticed. Jason didn't yell. He didn't slam his hand or throw anything. He just stood up, leaned across the table and grabbed her wrist. Hard. Not enough to leave a mark right away, just enough to make her stop breathing for a second. That was the part that got me. Not the force, the control. Emily didn't pull away. She froze, like she already knew how far this could go. And then I heard it, a soft sound from across the table. A clap. I turned my head slowly, and there was Linda sitting back in her chair, smiling, like she'd just watched someone finish a good presentation. "That's how women learn," she said, like she was explaining something obvious. Nobody laughed. Nobody argued. Jason let go of Emily's wrist like nothing had happened and sat back down. Emily picked up the spoon from the floor, her hands shaking just enough that you'd miss it if you weren't looking for it. I was looking. I looked at her wrist. I looked at his face. I looked at Linda, still calm, still satisfied. And in that moment, everything made sense in a way I wish it hadn't. This wasn't new. This wasn't a bad night. This was a system. I didn't stand up. I didn't tell him to get his hands off my daughter. I didn't call him out, and I definitely didn't look at Linda and ask her what the hell was wrong with her. I stayed exactly where I was. Because I've spent 30 years of my life watching people like this. In boardrooms, in internal investigations, in situations where the worst thing you can do is show your hand too early. People think control looks loud. It doesn't. It looks like this. Quiet, measured, rehearsed. If I had reacted, they would have adjusted, smiled, apologized, told me I misunderstood, and I would have lost the only thing that mattered. The truth of how far this actually went. So I did the one thing nobody expected me to do. I kept eating. Not because I was calm, not because I was okay, but because I wanted to see what they would do next if they thought no one was going to stop them. And that's when I noticed something that told me this had been going on a lot longer than I had allowed myself to believe. I kept my eyes on her hand a second longer than I should have. Not the wrist he grabbed. The way her fingers curled in slightly, like she was trying to make them smaller without realizing it. Emily never used to do that. She used to talk with her hands. Loud, confident, sometimes a little too much. If she disagreed with you, you knew it within 5 seconds. If she thought something didn't make sense, she'd say it out loud, even if it made people uncomfortable. That didn't come from me. That came from her father. Tom had this way of letting her speak like she mattered, even when she was 10 years old, and arguing about things she barely understood. He didn't shut her down. He asked questions. He listened. He let her push back. That kind of upbringing doesn't just disappear. It gets worn down. I remember a Sunday morning years ago, long before Jason ever showed up. Emily was sitting at the kitchen table arguing with Tom about some zoning policy she'd read about. She had papers spread out coffee she didn't need, and that look on her face like she was absolutely certain she was right. Tom just smiled and said, "Then prove it." She did. That was her. She didn't wait for permission to think. When Tom died, that part of her didn't vanish overnight. It just quieted. Grief doesn't always make people fall apart. Sometimes it makes them softer in places they used to be firm. It makes them more willing to keep the peace, more willing to let things go that they would have challenged before. That's the version of her Jason met. He came into her life about 6 months after the funeral. At first, everything I heard about him sounded reasonable. He asked about her work. He remembered details. He showed up when she needed help with small things. Nothing dramatic, just consistent. That's what people miss when they look at relationships like this from the outside. They expect a clear turning point, a moment where everything obviously goes wrong. There isn't one. It starts with someone paying attention in a way that feels good when you're not used to feeling seen anymore. Emily told me he respected her. that he liked how driven she was, that he thought it was impressive she had her own opinions. And for a while I believed her, because when I met him, he knew exactly how to present himself. Polite, measured. The kind of man who lets you finish your sentence, nods at the right moments, and never says too much. Looking back, that wasn't respect. That was assessment. The first change I noticed wasn't anything obvious. It was how Emily started pausing before she answered simple questions. I'd ask her how work was going, and instead of jumping in like she used to, she'd take a second. Just enough time to think about what she was about to say. Not because she didn't know the answer, because she was deciding how it would sound. Then came the smaller things. She stopped wearing certain clothes. Nothing drastic, just different. Less color, less attention. When I asked about it, she shrugged and said it was easier this way. More appropriate for where Jason was trying to take his business. That word came up a lot. Appropriate. Not wrong, not forced. Just adjusted. She went out less with her friends. Said everyone was busy. Said it was easier to stay in. Said she didn't need all that anymore. At the time, it all sounded like normal adult life. People settle down, priorities change, relationships shift. That's what I told myself. And maybe that's the part I still think about the most. Not the dinner, not the moment he grabbed her, but all the small changes I explained away because they didn't look like a problem on their own, because none of them by themselves would have made me say anything. But sitting at that table watching her pull her hand back, like it didn't belong to her anymore, I realized something I hadn't let myself say out loud. This didn't start at dinner. I started replaying conversations I hadn't thought about in months. Not the big ones, the small ones, the kind you forget 5 minutes after they happen. Emily used to tell me everything, not in a dramatic way, just casually. Little updates during her drive home, random thoughts, while she was cooking things that didn't seem important at the time. That slowed down after Jason. At first, I figured it was normal. People get busy. Relationships take time. You don't call your mother every day when you're building a life with someone. But when the calls did happen, something felt edited. She would start a sentence, stop halfway, then restart it in a slightly different way, like she was running her own thoughts through a filter before letting them out. One night, she mentioned a work meeting, said she had disagreed with someone about a timeline. Before I could even respond, she added, "But Jason thinks I might have come off a little strong." I hadn't asked what Jason thought. I asked what she thought. She paused. That same pause I'd noticed before. Well, maybe he's right. That was new. Emily didn't used to outsource her opinions. I didn't push it. Not because I didn't notice, but because I didn't have enough to justify turning it into something bigger. And that's how this kind of thing works. Each moment is just small enough to ignore on its own. A few weeks later, I saw it again, this time in person. We were at her apartment. She was getting ready for a small event Jason had invited her to. Nothing formal, just one of those networking dinners where everyone pretends they're not evaluating each other. She walked out of the bedroom in a dress I'd seen her wear before. It looked like her, confident, comfortable. Jason looked at her, smiled, and said, "That's a little much for tonight, don't you think?" He didn't say no. He didn't tell her to change. He just tilted his head slightly, like he was offering a helpful observation. Emily laughed it off at first. "It's fine." Jason shrugged. "I mean, you can wear it. I just don't want people getting the wrong impression." That phrase again, wrong impression. He didn't define it. He didn't need to. Emily looked down at herself, then back at him. "I'll switch," she said. He didn't argue. He didn't insist. He just nodded like she had come to the right conclusion on her own. She went back into the bedroom and came out a few minutes later in something simpler, softer, less noticeable. Jason smiled. That's better. Better. Not for her. For him. For what he wanted people to see. I remember standing there watching that exchange, trying to decide if I was overreacting. Because nothing he said was technically wrong. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't demanding. He wasn't controlling in any obvious way. He was just adjusting. And she was just agreeing. That was the part that bothered me. Not that he had an opinion, that she stopped trusting her own. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. It was a series of small corrections spaced out just enough that you couldn't line them up unless you were looking for a pattern. What to wear, what to say, who to spend time with, how to respond. Each one came with a reason. Each one sounded reasonable. Each one left her just a little more unsure of herself than before. And then Linda started reinforcing it. Not in front of everyone. Not in a way you could easily call out. She'd lean in during quiet moments, lower her voice like she was sharing something valuable. A man in his position needs a certain kind of support. Or strong personalities are great, but marriage isn't about winning. She never told Emily to change. She explained why changing made sense. That's what made it effective. Because by the time I noticed how often Emily was agreeing with things she used to challenge, it didn't look like pressure anymore. It looked like a choice. And that's when I understood something I wish I had recognized sooner. Nobody had to force her into that version of herself. They just made it feel like the safer option. I noticed it the next time she reached for something in front of me. Not what she grabbed, how she did it. Slow, careful, like she was measuring the space around her before moving. That wasn't how Emily used to exist in a room. We were in her kitchen, late afternoon, nothing serious. I had stopped by with groceries she didn't ask for, but would never refuse. She was putting things away when a glass slipped slightly in her hand and tapped the counter. It wasn't loud. It didn't break. But her entire body reacted. She froze for half a second, then looked toward the hallway, like she expected someone to be standing there. No one was. Jason wasn't even home. I didn't say anything right away. I just watched her pick the glass back up, place it down more carefully this time, then exhale like she'd been holding her breath. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah," she said quickly. Too quickly. Just tired. Tired. That word had started showing up everywhere. Tired was her explanation for everything now. For why she didn't call as much. Why she didn't go out. Why she didn't argue. Tired was easier than explaining something she didn't fully understand herself. Later that evening, I saw it more clearly. We were sitting on the couch talking about nothing important when she shifted her sleeve without thinking. Just a small movement. Enough for me to see it. A faint discoloration just above her wrist. Not dark, not dramatic, but not nothing. I didn't point at it. I didn't grab her arm. I didn't turn it into a moment she could shut down. I just asked, "What happened there?" She looked down like she hadn't even realized it was visible. "Oh. I bumped into the door yesterday," she said. "Casual, practiced." I nodded. That door must have moved pretty fast. She gave a small smile, the kind that tries to end a conversation without actually ending it. "It's nothing." There it was, not denial, minimization. That's how people live with things they don't want to name. I let it go. Out loud. But I didn't let it go in my head, because I had already seen how Jason used his hands. Not to hit, not to leave obvious damage, just enough pressure to remind you where you stood. A few days later, I got a text from her. "Can you talk?" That alone told me more than the words did. Emily didn't ask to talk unless something was already bothering her. When she came over that night, she didn't sit right away. She stood in the kitchen, arms crossed like she was trying to hold herself together long enough to say what she needed to say. "He gets frustrated sometimes," she started. Frustrated? Another word doing too much work. With what I asked. She hesitated, looked down, then said, "Just things. Work. Me. Me." She said it like it made sense. I leaned against the counter and kept my voice steady. "What does frustrated look like?" She didn't answer right away. Then she held her wrist out slightly. Not fully. Just enough. "He grabbed me the other night. Not hard. Just..." She stopped herself. Just. That word again. Just what I asked. Just to get my attention. I let that sit there for a second. Because that's how it starts. Not with something you can clearly call abuse, but with something that sounds like it could be explained. "He said I was talking over him," she added quickly. And I guess I was. There it was. The shift. It wasn't just that he did something. It was that she was already explaining why it made sense. I didn't tell her what to do. I didn't say the word abuse. Because if I said it too early, she would reject it. People don't accept labels that force them to rethink everything at once. So I asked something simpler. Did it make you feel safe? She looked at me surprised by the question. Then she answered without thinking. No. And that was the first honest answer I'd heard in weeks. She pulled her sleeve back down, like the conversation had gone too far, like she needed to put everything back where it belonged. It's not a big deal, she said again, softer this time. I nodded, but in that moment, I stopped asking myself if something was wrong. Because it wasn't a question anymore. I started writing things down that night. Not in a dramatic way, no big declarations, just a legal pad on my kitchen table and a pen that worked. Date, time, what she said, what I saw. It felt familiar. For years, my job had been to sit in rooms where people told partial truths and wait long enough to see the full pattern. You don't interrupt. You don't accuse too early. You document. Because people who think they're in control tend to repeat themselves. Emily didn't know I was doing it. Not because I was hiding it from her, but because I didn't want to change how she talked. The moment someone feels observed, they adjust. And I needed everything exactly as it was. A few days after she showed me her wrist, she called while she was driving home. I could hear the turn signal in the background, a sound I used to hear almost every evening. Work was weird today, she said. How so? They moved me off the Riverside project. That caught my attention. She'd been leading that for months. Why? They said they needed someone more consistent. Consistent? That doesn't make sense, I said. You've been on that project since I know she cut in quickly. It's fine. It's probably just timing. Timing. Another explanation that explained nothing. I didn't argue. I asked one question. Did they give you anything in writing? A pause. No, it was just a conversation. Of course it was. Nothing official, nothing you could challenge. Just enough to move her out without leaving a trail. That went on the list. Later that week, I noticed something else. We were at a small event Jason had invited her to. One of those quiet networking things where everyone pretends they're relaxed while quietly measuring each other. Emily stood next to him most of the night, smiling, nodding, saying very little. At one point, someone asked her about her work. A simple question, she started answering, then glanced at Jason mid-sentence. Not for approval exactly, more like confirmation. He gave a small nod. She kept going. That was new. Emily used to answer questions like that without checking anyone. On the drive home, I didn't bring it up. I just asked, "Did you enjoy that?" She shrugged. It was fine. Just fine. It's important for Jason's business. There it was again. His business, his image, his world. And she was adjusting to fit it. That went on the list too. Over the next couple of weeks, the pattern got clearer. Small things, but consistent. She checked her phone before responding to messages like she was making sure there wasn't something she was missing. She apologized more. Not for big things. For tone. For timing. For things that didn't used to require apologies. She stopped finishing her own thoughts. And every time something shifted, there was a reason. Work stress. Miscommunication. Timing. Pressure. All reasonable. All incomplete. I wasn't looking for one big moment anymore. I was looking for repetition. Because repetition is what turns behavior into structure. One night I sat at my table looking over everything I had written down so far. Individually, none of it would hold up to scrutiny. A reassigned project. A change in tone. A bruise that could be explained. But lined up in order with dates and context, it showed something else. Control doesn't need to be obvious to be effective. It just needs to be consistent. And once I saw that clearly, I stopped thinking about what I was going to say to Jason. Because this wasn't something you argued your way out of. This was something you had to understand completely before you made a move. And I wasn't done understanding it yet. I stopped treating it like a family issue the day her boss used the word concern. We were sitting at her kitchen table, laptops open, going through emails she had forwarded me. Nothing dramatic, no accusations, just language. Careful language. Concerns about consistency. Feedback from multiple team members. Questions around focus, no specifics, no names, no incidents tied to anything concrete. Just enough to create a record. Who said this? I asked. They didn't say, Emily replied, staring at the screen like she might find an answer if she looked long enough. Did anyone talk to you before this? She shook her head. Not really. Just small comments here and there. Of course. That's how it starts. Quiet adjustments. Then documentation. Then a version of reality that becomes harder to challenge the longer it sits there. Did you respond? I asked. I said I'd try to improve. Improve what neither of us said it out loud. I leaned back in the chair and looked at her. Emily, have you had any issues with deadlines? Missed anything? No. Conflicts with your team? No. Then this isn't performance. She didn't answer, because part of her already knew that, but knowing something and accepting it are two different things. A few days later, it escalated. She called me in the middle of the afternoon. Not her usual time, not her usual tone. They want me to take leave, she said. What kind of leave? Just time off. They said it might be better until things settle down. Settle down how? I don't know. Yes, she did. She just didn't want to say it. They said it's mutual, she added quickly. Like, it's my choice. That word again, choice. I closed my eyes for a second, not out of frustration, but to slow myself down. Did they put that in writing? I asked. No, then it's not mutual. She was quiet on the other end. They said they're trying to help, she said. They're protecting themselves, I replied. That's how it works here. Companies don't remove people because of one incident. They build a case, quietly, slowly, with language that sounds neutral until it isn't. And someone was feeding them that language. That was the part that mattered. Later that week, I started noticing something else. Not in her, in me. A message from an old colleague, casual on the surface. Hey, heard a few things about what's going on with your daughter. Hope everything's okay. A few things. That meant the story was already moving. Another message, this time less careful. Patricia. I don't know what you're involved in, but people are starting to talk. Might be worth stepping back. Stepping back from what I hadn't done anything. Not publicly, not formally, not in any way that should have reached outside our home. Which meant one thing. This wasn't just happening to Emily, it was expanding. I pulled up my own email and searched for my name. Then for keywords tied to my past work. Then for anything that might connect me to current complaints. Nothing direct, but there were questions. Requests for clarification on decisions I had made years ago. Old files being reopened. Not as accusations, just interest. It was subtle, too subtle to fight directly. And that's what made it effective. Because now the pressure wasn't just on her to explain herself. It was on both of us to prove we weren't the problem. That's how systems like this protect themselves. They don't just isolate the person you're trying to control. They widen the circle until anyone close to them feels the weight of it too. I sat at my desk that night looking at everything laid out in front of me. Her work situation, the messages I'd received, the pattern we were already seeing at home. Individually, none of it crossed a clear line. Together, it was something else entirely. And for the first time, I stopped asking how far this could go. Because the answer was already starting to show up in places it shouldn't have reached. I opened the public records database the same way I used to open case files at work. No assumptions, just names, dates, and connections. Jason Keller's company looked clean at first glance. Standard filings, predictable structure, nothing that raised immediate concern. If you didn't know what you were looking for, you'd stop there. I didn't stop there. I started cross-referencing. Vendors, LLC registrations, financing disclosures, the kind of details most people skip because they don't look important on their own. That's where I saw it. The same name appearing across multiple entries. Daniel Cruz. Not as an owner, not as a partner, just present. Consulting here, financial oversight there, sign-off authority in places that didn't quite match Jason's supposed independence. It didn't prove anything yet, but it suggested something. So I reached out. Not aggressively, not emotionally. Just a short direct message introducing myself, referencing his prior work with Keller Development, and asking if he'd be open to a brief conversation. He responded the next day. We met in a small coffee shop on the edge of downtown. Neutral ground. No connection to either of us. Daniel wasn't dramatic. He didn't lean in or lower his voice like he was about to reveal something explosive. He just answered questions. Jason runs the front, he said plainly. But major decisions don't move without his mother. Linda. I let that sit for a moment. Financially, operationally too, he said. If something affects reputation, she's involved. Always. That matched what I was already seeing. Why'd you leave? I asked. He gave a small shrug. Different approach to risk. That was one way to put it. I didn't ask about abuse. He didn't bring it up. That wasn't the purpose of the conversation. I was mapping structure, and the structure was clear. Jason wasn't operating alone. He wasn't even the center of it. He was positioned there, managed, supported, protected. That mattered. Because it meant any action he took wasn't just personal behavior. It was backed by something. I thanked Daniel for his time and left without pushing further. I had what I needed. Not proof of what he did at home, but proof of how control worked around him. Back at my desk, I went through everything again. Her messages, her work records, the timeline I had built, the pattern of escalation, and now the missing piece, context. This wasn't random. It wasn't stress. It wasn't a series of bad decisions. It was consistent, deliberate, supported. I called Emily the next morning. Can you come by tonight? I asked. There was a pause. Is everything okay? Yes, I said. We just need to talk. When she walked into my house that evening, she looked exhausted. Not physically, mentally, like she had spent too much time trying to make sense of things that didn't add up. We sat at the table. I didn't start with Jason. I didn't start with Linda. I started with her. Do you feel safe? I asked. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, I don't know. That was more honest than anything she'd said before. I nodded. That's enough. She looked at me confused. Enough for what? For us to stop guessing. I slid a folder across the table. Not thick, not overwhelming, just organized. Dates, messages, notes, a timeline she could follow without me explaining it. She opened it slowly. I didn't talk while she read, didn't point anything out, didn't guide her to a conclusion, because she needed to see it the way I had seen it, piece by piece. When she finished, she sat back in the chair staring at the last page longer than the others. This is all real, she asked quietly. Yes. She swallowed. So what do we do? That was the first time she said we. I leaned forward slightly. We use it. Not to argue, not to confront, but to put everything exactly where it belonged. In a system that doesn't rely on opinion, I watched her close the folder, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't apologize for anything. Not for how she felt, not for what she said, not for taking up space in her own life. That was when I knew something had shifted. Not everything, not all at once, but enough. What happened after that wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting match, no big moment where everything exploded, and everyone finally said what they'd been holding back. It was quieter than that. Emily filed for a protection order. She stopped responding to his messages. She documented everything the way I taught her. When he showed up where he wasn't supposed to, there were records. When he crossed a line, it wasn't a debate. It was a violation. And systems real. Systems don't care about excuses. They care about evidence. Jason didn't lose control. He ran out of it. Linda didn't collapse overnight. People like her rarely do. But the room around her got smaller. Invitations slowed down. Conversations changed tone. Influence doesn't disappear. It just stops working the same way. And Emily, she didn't suddenly become who she used to be. That part takes time. She moved to Minneapolis, took a role that didn't come with a title anyone would recognize at a networking dinner, started therapy, not once, not twice, regularly. Some days she still questions herself. Some days she still rewrites her own sentences before she says them out loud, but now she notices when she does it. And that's where it starts. The first real step isn't confidence, it's awareness. If there's anything I've learned from this, it's this: control doesn't show up the way people expect. It doesn't walk in and announce itself. It sounds reasonable. It feels small. It asks you to adjust just a little at a time until you don't recognize where you stopped being yourself. And by the time it turns into something you can name, you've already been living inside it for a while. The second thing is this: silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's timing. If I had reacted that night at the dinner table, I would have gotten an apology, a denial, maybe even a promise, and everything would have gone right back to where it was. Instead, I waited long enough to see the pattern clearly, long enough to make a move that actually held. That's the difference. Not louder, just smarter. And finally, you don't fix something like this by winning an argument. You fix it by stepping out of the version of reality someone else built for you. Emily didn't win, she reclaimed. There's a difference. If this story felt familiar to you in any way, if you've ever seen something that didn't sit right, but couldn't explain why, pay attention to that. Ask questions, even the uncomfortable ones. And don't rush to explain things away just because they don't look serious on the surface. Most of the time, that's exactly how they start. If you're into family revenge stories and real-life family drama that actually reflects how things happen in the real world, subscribe to the channel. There's more here than just stories. Sometimes it's about seeing something clearly for the first time.